Leadership is to take action in a way that adds value to someone else. So now I'm going to talk about a very specific situation, which is when a leader goes into a new context. So what's an example? You've been a successful senior executive in the private sector and you go into the government. Or you've been a successful leader in the government and you go into academia. And why do I talk about this situation? Because a lot of the work I've done over the years is advising people going through those transitions. And what you have to realize is the leadership style that worked in one industry would not work in a different industry. You have to dramatically adapt. And why is that? I like to call it embedded design factors. In the private world, given enough time, money, determination, you can change the strategy of a business, you can change the people, you can change a lot of the way you're operating. In academia, you could go from the private sector to be a university president or a senior person in the university. You're not going to change that there's tenure. And that once someone gets tenure, you really do not have a lot of influence over them at all. In fact, a tenured person has got a more secure job than you do, for example, as a dean or university professor. Same thing in the government sector. You have certain institutions where they're run by statute, and you're not going to change those design factors. You're not going to change the role of Congress, you're not going to change the role of executive branch versus other branches, and you need to adapt. What often happens is people who are CEOs in the private sector are more directive often, are more quick to take action, and might often be a little less participative. They might be less inclined and get away with occasionally making decisions without sharing information. And it works because they're in the private sector and they have a lot of power because they have the power to hire, fire, promote, pay comp. Roll forward to academia. If you're a university president or a dean, being directive is unlikely to be an effective strategy because you've got much more shared power among the people you're managing. And you would be far better served to share more information, be more participative. You got to be very careful if you're going to make a decision that's directive without getting a lot of input and buy-in. People who make the move between those three sectors, first you have to do an analysis of the context you're getting into and who has the power, what's the role and formal authority, what's your expertise, what's your credibility, and you need to adjust your leadership style. Good leaders got several styles, sometimes very participative, when appropriate, directive. You have to learn based on the context you're walking into. The only thing that trumps all this is it a crisis? If it's a crisis, people want you to be more directive and less participative. There's not time to consult as much. And then when peace breaks out, you got to be less directive, more participative. What happens to a lot of leaders is because you're so stressed out, you think it's a crisis, but no one else in the organization thinks it is. And you're doing things that are directive because you think it's a crisis. And people in the organization just think what you're doing is inappropriate because they don't share your feeling of urgency. And so, again, that's a context. What's the nature of the organization? What's the nature of the situation? You need to always think about that as a leader before you figure out the appropriate leadership style.